welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKenda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller, who, may I remind you, is officially paid off by Disney.
That is true. If you are just now joining us, the one thing that you need to know is that this man has stocks in the enemy.
Unlike other critics, I am legit paid off by Disney. So let's get that out of the way. I say this because I have to praise the very bold decision to replace fun, creative, unique short films at the beginning of every Pixar films with a fucking Simpsons short with a brand buyout.
God, that was the part that got me the most, I think, of this fucking Simpsons short, was that I'm like, I could be watching, like, any of the other Pixar movies that have gotten me just so fucking, like, full of emotion. The Paper Airplane short is one of my all-time favorites. I love that one so fucking much. And instead we had to watch this faux saccharine bullshit with Maggie Simpson and just some unnamed kid. And, like, I called the ending twist, and I'm gonna spoil it because you know what? If you're gonna go watch Onward, give yourself an extra 20 minutes so you don't have to watch this, because that lets you skip the fucking trailers ahead of it and this 5-minute bullshit Simpsons thing that is far and away the worst part of Onward.
I'm remembering that this is a trend now of Disney just pumping up their own brands, because there was the Olaf bullshit in front of Coco, which I was late for. Thankfully, I didn't see that one.
I forgot about that. Oh,
can I just say that, like, I was in a theater of like 6 people on like a Monday evening in the midst of a mass pandemic where nobody wants to go outside, and like, even you could feel the energy in the theater when like the Mickey Mouse logo faded and it was Homer with the donuts. Like, you could feel the pure like disgust and confusion like echoing even through like the only 5 people in that theater.
It was us and 2 other people in the theater for Onward, and I don't think I heard a single noise during the Simpsons short, because it was, well, I did hear a couple noises, mostly me and Sam going, oh my God, why are we watching this? As I said, I'm gonna spoil the ending because it ends with like the kid getting on a train and riding away, and I lean over to Sam and just go, it's a circle track. It's a joke because they're toddlers, and so the kid's not actually leaving anywhere. He's gonna be back in 10 seconds. And sure enough, the kid's back in 10 seconds. And that's the ultimate payoff to this short. That was the final joke of this short and that you're supposed to care about. No.
I just felt like such a more profound sense of disgust from this, like, especially because I've been watching these are great videos, by the way, if you haven't watched them. Super Eye Patch Wolf Simpsons videos, where he talks about like the decline of the series and like kind of Simpsons meme culture.
Have you watched The Simpsons like at all, really?
Oh, I used to be a big fan.
Okay, what I was gonna say is I've watched a bunch of like Simpsons pop culture videos and like discussion of that stuff. I've seen maybe 20 episodes in my entire life. I just think that stuff is fascinating, even without the outside, like the internal culture of it for myself.
For sure, Simpsons is a really unique cultural beast, and it's really inexplicable that it's still going, and really sad that it's still going. But no, I mean, I used to be a big fan. Not like, I would have been a little too young. Like, we would have been a little too young for like groundbreaking, ground zero, like heyday, golden age Simpsons. So I would have gotten into it like on reruns of that stuff and the stuff that came after, like when it started to decline before turning into like, God, like I've seen like clips of newer Simpsons episodes. It really is like sub Family Guy garbage. Like, it's unbelievable how bad The Simpsons is now. And
I mean, just watch the short. That's all you really need to know about it.
I was gonna say, and so I mean, I don't think like there is any more appropriate image for the state of movies than like when they did the like the classic like like in the movie theater, like Gracie Films or whatever, and you see Mickey Mouse there, and knowing that The Simpsons began as this like counterculture, like fuck you to the overly sanitized like image of the American family, and seeing
the movie even has that joke about Bart putting a bra on his head and going, look, I'm an evil corporate overlord, look at me. That's now owned by Disney. his satirization of Disney is now owned by Disney. And like that is not something that I am bringing to the table as, look at me, I'm the first person to point that out. I stole that from something on Twitter, I guarantee it. But the point stands very clearly.
So there's a Simpsons short at the beginning of our new Pixar film. We just had to talk about it because it truly is an indicator of what a nightmare hell world we continue to. I wouldn't even say we existed in at this point. We're buying time.
I wonder if that's why I've fallen into horror so much, because Disney refuses to touch horror, right? Like they have a family-friendly image. And so they're trying to keep a little bit of a distance from that. And that's why, like, it's the one thing to me that feels like it's unsanitized by this Disney sheen.
How miserable is it going to be when Disney finally does an Alien film?
Fuck yourself. I'm not even going to answer that question. I refuse to think about it. Fuck yourself. We are defenders, at least in some capacity, of the new Alien movies too. I am a staunch defender of Prometheus.
True.
We both have some decent things to say about Covenant.
We're new Alien sympathetic. We're new Alien sympathizers at minimum. That's how I would describe myself, at least.
And we dread this. All right, let's talk about Onward. We just can't continue to fucking wallow in the state of movie cinema. We do this every fucking week where we're just like, oh, it's the same shit as the last week. Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? We need to just talk about Onward. So let's talk about Onward. Jackson, what'd you think of Onward?
I actually, for all my bemoaning of Disney, I'm glad that I had the Simpsons punching bag to punch at for a bit, because I quite liked it. I didn't love it. I imagine we're going to be talking about Pixar as a studio quite a bit. That's mostly what dominated our pre-discussion.
That right there, honestly, just saying that Pixar dominated our pre-discussion, not the movie, says a lot about what we're getting into. Because if the movie dominates our pre-discussion, it's because we either have a deep love for it, are conflicted about it, or hated it. And that doesn't fit our category here at all.
No, I think I'm a little more positive on it, though. I think that the reason that I was so interested in the Pixar stuff is just because what I liked about it is just, this is stuff that's well done, funny and or sad, that's sort of hard to like launch into. I mean, I guess I could trot out my like grief drama bullshit again, but I don't think anyone wants to hear that. But with regards to like the Pixar canon, if I had to make a comparison, it's not as good as Coco or any of the Golden Age stuff, wherever you draw the line on Golden Age. I'd put it about on par with Inside Out, meaning that it's good. It's got more creative energy than a lot of the recent like sequel corporate Disney slop, but it's not quite there. It's not quite there. But I overall did quite enjoy it. I had a lot of fun. I teared up when I needed to. It was solid. It was a solid film.
Yeah, and don't let my early kind of bashing of it belay what you think my position on this movie is. I agree with Jackson pretty much across the board on that. I would have originally said I would describe it in similar to Brave, in that it was a movie that I was very excited for but was kind of let down by. But I think Brave is not quite the right description of this, because I think Brave is kind of a bad movie in hindsight, whereas this, yeah, Inside Out's a good comparison to it. I didn't hate it. I didn't dislike it. I think that there was a lot of stuff about it that I actually did really like, but it also didn't coalesce into anything that I ever loved. And am I good to talk a little bit about why?
Oh, absolutely, go for it.
Cool. I just know that this is going to start leading us into other stuff, and I didn't want to jump into it if, we weren't quite there yet. So the idea of Onward is basically a world that once had magic in it and has since been forgotten, which is a very evocative idea. It's something that I think both works on a metaphorical level for, growing up and changing, and Pixar. I mean, it's Pixar in every way, shape, and form. Both in the idea of that they once held magic for us, but maybe not as much anymore. And is also what like every one of their movies is about. Growing up, aging, becoming another person, losing what you once had. Which could also be why Pixar doesn't agree with us as much as it once did. It could also just be a genuine drop in quality. It's hard to say without those nostalgia goggles that we will have on our heads for the rest of our lives. But in this movie, it also creates a really interesting world where you have a modern aesthetic it juxtaposed against a world that still could theoretically have magic within it. And that in and of itself is a really good, clever idea, and one that I absolutely want to love, because it's a very D&D-esque, but also kind of dystopian, also kind of steampunk, except like none of the aesthetics of steampunk, just the ideology of it. And that's a very interesting idea to me. But the movie never really lets it breathe and become its own world. It always feels like it's too hurried to get us on to the next point, because there are 3 storylines running simultaneously. Well, 2.5 storylines, because you have Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, the brothers, doing their thing.
And then half a dad, 2.5.
2.5 men.
Bye.
You have the mom and her counterpart, which I'm not going to kind of reveal right now just in case you view that as a spoiler, and I can completely see why you would. And then you have this half a story with Paul Blart Mall Cop. I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to call him Paul Blart Mall Cop. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly who I'm talking about. If you haven't, you'll find out. Little tease there. Tickle the balls. And so the movie just constantly ricochets between these 2.5 stories, as well as trying to build the world. And you never really get to settle into any of them before moving on to the next element of it. So like, I want to settle in this world. I want to feel the world wash over me and, be absorbed in it. And there's one scene where they're on their quest and a plane flies overhead as this majestic high fantasy scenery lays out in front of them. And it's such a wonderful scene that just underscores everything that this movie could be, but it also underscores everything that the movie is, because it lasts 3 seconds and then boop, we're on to the next scene, and we can't just absorb this beautiful juxtaposition of imagery that the movie is offering your eyeballs. Yeah, you have to move on, and that's a bummer to me, because there is some really cool stuff to that.
Yeah, I generally agree. The world building, I think that my general experience with the movie was that I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it for a little while, but once the quest is kind of in full swing, I found myself enjoying it a lot more, enjoying the character dynamics. I think that where the movie's strength lies is that even if it bungles the world building a little bit, which is what I'd say separates Coco and puts Coco more in like the Golden Age category, and that was very well thought out. And I never found myself getting taken out of the movie trying to like tussle with like metaphors or logic or what have you, whereas I did it a couple times in this, and I don't want to launch into that right now. But the core story of a kid trying to resurrect his dead dad, there might be a reason that I'm interested in that kind of story. Seriously though, from where I'm standing, like it wasn't just like cheap manipulation. It's easy to see how like a story like that could fall into cheap manipulation, but the feelings at the core of that, and sort of the conflict between the brothers and how their relationship with their father differs and how that plays in the relationship with each other, is like, that's all very well done, and I think that's what makes the movie and gives it my like overall recommendation, plus there being enough fun stuff. Like there's just a lot of stuff in this movie that's fun, and I think that's the secret sauce of Pixar. Like, oh, we have a story about like a kid trying to resurrect the father you never knew. Well, that's dark. How do we make it not miserable? Well, he's pants the whole time. We're gonna Weekend at Bernie's him around this fantasy world, and it works. It totally works. So like that stuff, the core story, I would actually say is very good. It's when you start to examine the periphery, like you say, and like you can feel the movie kind of stretching beneath its own weight a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like once again, I don't want to make it seem like I didn't like the movie, because to echo Jackson, that first act was kind of a struggle. It was a little rough in a lot of places, but once the second act, the quest really got underway, I wouldn't say I settled into any particular part of the movie, but I settled into the movie as a whole, even if I was kind of uncomfortable with the individual storylines. Like I let myself enjoy it. I found, humor and some good times. And like I never was bored within the movie because the movie just kept going. It just I never really connected with any particular element of it. But also the third act does bring it home in a very good, emotionally resonant way. So like I can't even say that, it failed in that front either. I don't know. It's kind of a tough movie to crack. And would I recommend it? I mean, it's a fucking Pixar movie. You're not going to have a bad time with it. Wait till it comes on a DVD if you want. See it in theaters if you want. Who fucking cares? You know you're going to like it.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the weird thing is that we talk about, and this is maybe segueing into the like Pixar as a studio stuff, because like we are not the first to observe that like maybe there has been a change at least in how Pixar does things or their reputation, because for a while there Pixar was considered almost as untouchable as like Ghibli. Like they were kind of seen as like the Western Ghibli, of the ones making the most like emotionally resonant like animated films. They were pushing the line in terms of technology. Like their storytelling was always on point. Like if you look at that like span of original films, barring like Bug's Life, which I haven't seen in forever. Like I love that movie when I was a kid, but I don't remember a thing about it.
I don't know that I've ever seen Bug's Life. I feel like I must have it. So I owned Bug's Life on VHS. Wow, that was a weird flashbulb memory. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. But like even Cars 1, like Cars 1 gets shit on quite a bit, but I think there's enjoyment to be had, even if it is lesser. As kind of like a
Cars 1 is fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
There's yeah.
The car western, like sitting in like the Cone Hotel. It's a vibe. It's a vibe at least. And so like what changed basically was that Pixar started making sequels that weren't Toy Story, which always had sequels and were good sequels. But the thing about it is that even after they started making the sequels, which were overall like definitely not a one of them is as good as the original. Again, like people argue about what the best Toy Story is. I would argue even in Toy Story's case that's still true. But the thing about these sequels is that none of them are bad. Like, none of them are miserable. Like, at worst, the worst thing I can say about the worst one is that they feel like a Marvel movie. But even I, like...
Well, you haven't seen Cars 2, right?
I have not seen Cars 2, that's true. Which is...
I mean, listen, Cars 2 is not bad in a conventional sense. I've seen a chunk of it at this point. It is bad, and it is in the fact that it is just fucking bizarre.
Yeah, well, Cars 2, from the trailers, it looked more like a DreamWorks movie, which is the sentiment I see echoed a lot.
Yeah, that's honestly fair. Yeah.
So I guess like I haven't seen all the new movies. Like obviously I didn't care to go out and see Cars 2 or 3. I didn't see Brave because it got bad reviews. I was excited for that one, but then
I was there opening day.
I remember when I heard what it was about. Actually, like what it was actually about, I was kind of like, oh. And then the reviews came in, and that it got kind of that reputation. So if we're drawing a split between Golden Age Pixar and modern Pixar, I would call it like Cars 2 is the turning point. And that actually works out well because Toy Story 3 would be the movie before that, and that would be like the first movie of a new decade, like the end of an era, like a new decade of Pixar that has continued since. But like even the lesser stuff, like Good Dinosaur, that movie's visually beautiful. Story-wise, it's completely forgettable, but like it's still got some merit.
Yeah, I've heard it's just like the best looking movie they've ever made. It just
the story, it's literally like they just made a standard like 90s kids movie in glorious Pixar like HD. It's kind of bizarre actually in that way. So even at their worst, I can't say that like they've fallen from grace like super duper hard, but like I would say that there is definitely a noticeable downtick to where the only movie of the more recent stuff that I've seen that I would put in like the Golden Age, among the Golden Age stuff, would be Coco, even though there are movies like Inside Out or this, or even Monsters University I kind of stand for, that are all fun. They're all good. I all actively enjoyed them, but they're not, they're not Up. They're not Wall-E. They're not Incredibles.
I think one of the biggest things that I can even say is that watching the trailer for Soul, I think it looks like a good movie. I'm very interested in seeing it. But when it shifts to the dead zone, it just looks like Inside Out.
That I was thinking that too, actually. Yep, because they played the trailer for that, and the premise and like the vibe that they have going before then is actually really interesting. And then it goes into Inside Out Zone, and this kind of gets into the quest discussion that we had. We actually did a little breakdown.
We did math for this podcast. You made 2 fucking people with writing degrees do math.
To be fair, I kind of inflicted it upon us because I proposed a hypothesis, because I'd been thinking about this, because obviously this movie is very much explicitly a quest movie, which, to be fair, is not a bad thing, especially because like for a premise like suburban fantasy to work, it kind of needs to be a quest movie. But like in general, I was thinking about Inside Out in particular and Ratatouille, and how both of those movies are kind of doing some like weird emotional stuff. But Ratatouille, I remember when I was younger, I was probably like 12 when that came out, so like I was just kind of growing out of animated movies too, I guess, or at least I thought I was.
Joke's on you, you're a man child.
I'm gonna say joke's on me. I'm about to rewatch all the DBZ, baby. So Ratatouille, but I think part of the reason I never saw that in theaters, even though it's a great movie and that, you know, I've seen since, was that I looked at it and I'm like, Rat learns how to cook, that's weird, like whatever. And I imagine that like younger kids see like Rat learns how to cook for like a French like food critic, and they're like, Mommy, I don't want to fucking see that. Like I want to see Lightning McQueen, you know?
Oh my god, as a quick aside, I have not mentioned this on this podcast. I'm doing some audio work for another podcast that you should go listen to, Discontent. At one point, one of the people on that podcast was talking about Ratatouille, and they were making the dish Ratatouille, and they just go, oh god, I feel like the man, not the rat. And it was like this most existential like horror that I have ever heard, and it was the funniest thing. Holy shit, go listen to Discontent if you haven't. Fuck, sorry, continue. Ratatouille and I feel like the man, not the rat is just a mood.
That was a weirdly odd point and horrifying plug. Anyway, but yeah, so like whereas Inside Out deals with like, you know, it's literally about like people's conflicting emotions in their heads, but what form does that take? It just takes the form of a quest movie. We got to get from, you know, happy girl and sad girl, they got to get from point A to point B, and along the way they'll meet some crazy characters like the imaginary friend and, you know, all that other stuff. And it's the actual plot is pretty formulaic, even if it is working from like from a more like emotional, like heady sort of space than like your average kids movie. And so we decided to test like how true that was, because I had even brought up, well, Coco, even the best of the modern Pixar movies, that's also like pretty clearly a quest movie. And you know, when you have Incredibles and WALL-E and other movies like that doing weird stuff structurally, like how do the numbers break down on that in the golden age versus modern Pixar?
We cracked these numbers. We worked through them. We made some executive decisions on here, like not including A Bug's Life of the original set of our pre-Cars 2 golden age. And of those 10 movies, excluding A Bug's Life, we found approximately 6 of the 10, 60%, are quest movies. If you want to include Bug's Life, we don't know. It would bring it up to about 63%. If you don't include Bug's Life, that's sweet 60%. Post Cars 2 and beyond, it's actually only one more movie that is considered a quest movie by our metrics. That's only a 70%, which isn't really that much more in the grand scheme of things. I mean, that 10% sounds like a lot, but I mean, percentages lie all the time.
Yeah, and you can think about it this way too, in that like if you combined, like if you just looked at their oeuvre as a whole and like saw how many of their movies total are quest movies, I'm sure that like it's a little more than half.
Yeah, it's gonna be sitting somewhere in that 65%,
which is interesting. And so, you know, obviously my hypothesis there was a little flawed. It's not that the number of quest movies has increased. I think it's more so that in the case of, I think the difference to illustrate between Inside Out and Coco, not so much Onward. I mean, Onward kind of needs to be a quest movie from the premise, so we're kind of getting into the weeds of like Pixar discussion here. But I think the difference is just that, like with Coco and maybe previous quest movies, world building was tight enough, and like I was so invested in the story and the characters that I never stopped and thought for a moment like, oh, we're just doing like a Disney quest here. Like I was too wrapped up in the story to concern myself with that. Whereas in Inside Out, I'm like, oh, this is fun, this is nice, so I'm tearing up a little bit here, but also now we have to do this bit where we go on, you know, journey to Candyland or whatever. And that's how Onward feels sometimes. I think that the middle part of the movie makes that a little better when they're like, you know, solving the puzzles and they have some physical comedy with the dad. And because it leans so hard into the quest angle, I obviously wasn't bothered by it in this instance, but it did lead me to think about how this is very well trodden ground for Pixar at this point, and if there has been a meaningful difference. So it was an interesting thought, to say the least.
So, just as another point against Onward and like understanding where I found this issue of it settling into the movie, Onward itself doesn't seem to know how to settle into its own world building, and like that's an actual plot point of the movie, is that like the people in the movie don't really believe that at one point magic was a thing. Like they're like, oh, I can't fly because that's never been a thing. They're like, no, you can. And so like you're constantly reminded of the fact that this movie doesn't believe in its own premise either, which is a plot point, yes, but when it doesn't give it the breathing room to flesh itself out all the way, it kind of becomes not a plot point. And I want to talk a little bit more about this, but it's going to be pure spoilers. So you good to go spoilers?
I think we're good to go spoilers here. Yeah, I think we've done enough like theoretical framework here.
Stellar. Then before we do spoilers, go rate us on iTunes, tell friends about us, follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast, patreon.com/BADHcast if you want that. Next week, we're getting back into a horror month, and we're going to talk about The Hunt, a movie that was supposed to come out last year, got delayed because people are idiots, and here it is, Friday the 13th, coming out. I'm excited to see how it goes. So that's next week.
Like, comment, subscribe. Let's go.
Huzzah! Spoilers. So I think the key example of this not, you know, embracing its own world building are the Pixies. Like, at one point, they run into them, they're on biker gangs now, which, haha, juxtaposition, yada yada, you've seen this joke a million times, short things, riding bikes, what a funny goof. Eventually, at one point, the older brother, Chris Pratt's character, is like, you guys used to be able to fly. And they're like, no, that's not true. And then eventually they find out that they could fly and that they can still fly. And so then they start becoming a roving flying gang of biker pixies. And that's just where it ends. Like, there's not really a resolution to that. Like, they just start flying around. They run into the mom's car at one point and then disappear from the movie. That's about halfway through the movie. That feels like it should be the reminder for a later payoff that never comes. And so instead, it just feels like this weird cliffhanger where the movie is trying to build a world, but doesn't commit all the way.
Yeah, and some of that world building, I mean, you're right, it does feel like the reminder for, like, you know, a pixie, like, they grab the sword after Ian, like, fucks up his spell, and they grab the sword to give it to them so he can drop it on the dragon or whatever, or something like that. I've got a different example for the world building, because this is, like, I think one of the things that kept me from settling in with the characters, which I thought were mostly pretty strong, was that Barley's character for that kind of half of like the buddy duo.
For what it's worth, in case you are listening to this without hearing it before, Barley, Chris Pratt, Ian, Peter Parker, what the fuck is his name?
Tom Holland.
Tom Holland, thank you.
Yeah. So basically his character is this. He is coded very heavily as like a stoner slacker guy. He's got his D&D minifigs on the table, and he doesn't have a job. And he drives a shitty car, and, you know, very, very heavily coded in that way. And obviously, like, the point is that, like, his brother doesn't really take him super seriously, and that, like, he kind of underestimates him, and everyone kind of underestimates him. And, you know, we're supposed to learn a lesson about ourselves and each other. Okay, fine. You know, good enough as far as these, like, buddy comedy movies go.
Animated kids movie. Page 1.
Yeah. So, the problem that I start to have with this character, one is just like, if I have to mention, it's kind of a miracle that I feel as positively about this movie as I do, because it does not one but two of my least favorite like pet peeve themes plot lines.
Mother Earth is alive and trying to regenerate itself?
That's number 3.
Oh shit. All right, never mind.
Number 1 centers around Barley's character, which is just like, hey man, fuck your logic and your reasoning. Like, fuck trying to have a sensible thought process. We're just gonna go with my gut and get rewarded for it. And that shit drives me nuts, and this movie indulges heavily in this. And I hate it.
Listen, it's not my cup of tea either. That's not to say it's like necessarily bad storytelling. There are a lot of movies that rely on this. It's just not our cup of tea. I am fully with Jackson on this. I don't like it, but like,
if I were the teacher in this writing class, like grading the script, that's the sort of thing I would circle and say, this isn't like technically wrong, but have a more sensible view of the world.
Fix your worldview, you little shit.
My other pet peeve trope, I guess, while we're talking about this isn't as important. This is again just more clearly where like me and the movie sort of unalign, is that like, because it has like the world's lost its magic with its premise, and part of this might be because it never really expounds on it and goes the distance with that metaphor that makes it feel like kind of natural or applicable. Is that it feels almost like Fight Club, like that kind of early 90s, like, we're all like tamed by like modern society. And whenever I see that plot line, I always think, motherfucker, if you think you're boring because of your iPhone, I hate to tell you that, like, if you were a farmer in the 19th century, you would not lead a more exciting life.
You would also be dead, Mr. 32-year-old.
Yeah, so like that's another pet peeve plot. I just wanted to get those out of the way, just so on the record against this shit. But back to Barley, and that like where I think it starts to become like a genuine script problem, and that the movie, as you say, it kind of deals a lot in shorthand. And so we have the shorthand of like him, the slacker, and when he starts to learn the spells, like the way that Ian learns his magic is just like, Barley opens up his D&D book and is like, yo, just do what the D&D book says. And when it first comes up, like, it, just based on everything else that we're led to believe about his character, and he says, nah, don't worry, dude, this is based on Japanese history with giant enemy crab, that meme. When you first hear that, you're thinking like, all right, this dude like just doesn't know what he's talking about, which I know it's the point that we're supposed to be underestimating him, but it's also kind of weird that like this thing that's so heavily coded to be exactly like D&D that he's into turns out to be like exact instructions on how to work like real magic.
And then it gets worse from there, because that, as one thing, undermines his character in a lot of ways. Because that as a start undermines the visual shorthand of his character. Okay, fine. We just need to reframe our view on him. Okay, he might be a little bit of a stoner slacker, but it's more of like a grad school student type of stoner slacker. Somebody who's just getting high and like, I'm a history major, and man, history is a flat circle. Type of bullshit. Fine. Except 20 minutes later, he's like, man, I screw everything up, even though I'm the only one that knew about magic and how to get you to do it and all the answers to the problems that we have had so far, but you still think I'm a screw up. Like, there's an idea here where the kid still finds him to be a screw up because he's still annoying. The younger brother finds him to be a screw up because he's still annoying and whatnot. But like, the very crux of the movie is that he is not a screw up, right?
Yeah, that he's actually like, it's so weird that like he's actually, like, if you think about the movie as is presented to us, is just like incredibly knowledgeable. Like, this is a guy who will be able to like win, who knows so much about like Napoleonic battle tactics that he would be able to win one of those battles. Like, that's the equivalent here.
He's not a slacker. He's just incredibly niche, which is a thing.
Yeah, and like he's basically a big old dweeb. Like, you got him. I mean, I guess the grad school comparison, like, maybe I am thinking about this wrong, because like the grad school comparison's apt because like he's chaining himself to monuments that he doesn't want to see torn down. But like otherwise, the movie, I don't know. I think it leans too hard into the slacker imagery and those, like, because it works in such shorthand that doesn't really line up with, like, it's not even like we're led to believe less of him because he drives like a shitty car. It's like we're led to believe less of him because he's obsessed with D&D, but as the movie goes on, we find out that D&D is real.
And also, we are expected to believe less of him because of D&D, which is a shorthand that has kind of faded out of existence at this point as D&D has risen in popularity. And so you're basically making a shorthand from the 90s, but also you're making a movie about D&D. People who are going to watch this movie aren't going to think, wow, look at this nerd playing D&D. I guess he's a lazy slacker stoner, not a D&D guy.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it again, I could see where the idea for this would have come up. Like, how it would have sounded good on paper to be like, oh man, like, yeah, like, we'll have it, like, they play D&D, but because they're all like elves and shit, like D&D is real. But like that just doesn't, because the movie is already dealing so much shorthand. Like that's one of those things that feels like a leap. I think that's one of the ways that the world building feels kind of confused. That even trying to describe it, I can't like fully put together like what exactly is happening. It just feels a little messy.
Genuinely, I think that if the mom had made a joke, instead of being about the brother being on the longest gap year of his life, that he was in grad school, the characterization would have stuck so much more because he feels like a grad student.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And that kind of paints him in a different light. But yeah, like, I mean, it does really ask you to operate under the assumption that like D&D is stupid, except obviously not, because obviously in the context of the world, it's real. And in the context of the real world, it's not, because presumably you're at least sympathetic to fantasy, you know, by stepping into the theater and paying for a ticket for a movie about an elf resurrecting his pants dad.
Plus, the movie clearly cared enough to actively license characters from D&D. I don't know if you stuck around long enough, but there was apparently a beholder at some point that I completely missed. And the gelatinous cube are both trademarks of D&D and needed to be licensed.
Shit, are they?
Yeah, there's a thing at the end of the credits that's like, these two characters were licensed from D&D.
That's kind of amazing and makes this an even more confusing, like, knot of incoherent world building.
Yeah. Can we untangle it, or do we want to move on to something else is the question.
I think we can move on to like other if we have another way that like this manifests, we could talk about that. But I think that trying to like the ultimate point is that like, yeah, I can see what they're going for, but the execution isn't there. Like that's the ultimate point with the world building, I think.
And that's my summary of the movie.
Yeah, well, I'll say this while I'm talking about stuff that's really nice. I think that the execution for like the dad dynamic and like some of those smaller scenes, like when they're goofy dancing with him, I thought that stuff was really well executed. And
I mean,
like,
Pixar just knows how to continue to like pull those heartstrings correctly.
Yeah. Well, I think to say that they just pull heartstrings, I think it's to sell them a little short, honestly. I think that they're really good at getting to the heart of like what is the emotional core. I think this is the difference between something like this and something like our bonus episode, like I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, right? Like where that was clearly just like playing you like a fiddle to try and make you tear up, like it's sadness porn. Whereas a Pixar movie, I think, has more of an understanding of what emotion they're trying to provoke. And so even though like resurrection in stories can be really tricky, and because it's something that like it's the biggest break from reality you could possibly make in a story, and I think that where this movie gets it right is like it's almost not so much about like the resurrection so much as it is about the desire to speak with someone who's no longer here, and like the emotional feeling of like growing up with someone who is an important fixture of your life who you nonetheless have never met. And so I think that when the ending comes, when Ian makes the decision like, hey, like I never knew Dad anyway, like I'm gonna give you the chance to have this catharsis and say goodbye, like I think that stuff hits really well and not in like a cheap sadness porn kind of way, you know what I mean?
I mean, it builds up to it. And I think the fact that it builds up to that and, you know, builds on the other moments that the movie has had, make it more resonant, which I guarantee is basically what you just said in a slightly different phrasing. But I mean, I can't really disagree with you. You're entirely correct. It's not just a quick X person died because X stupid thing happened unrelated to plot buildup at this point. I don't know what I could be referring to in that.
I just want to say it so bad, but that's a spoiler.
It is. It's such a spoiler. But with this, it all builds on itself, which is the important core difference between sadness porn and a well-crafted story. And I mean, when I say tug at your heartstrings, that's not to diminish what it's doing. I think I've said previously on the podcast that movies and all media is functionally emotional manipulation, and to do it well, even if it is tugging at your heartstrings, is good. Like, that means it's achieving its goals. I genuinely say to tug at your heartstrings in a good way, not as like, oh, there they go again, tugging at your heartstrings, doing things to characters off screen.
No, and like to be clear, like I more just wanted to use that as kind of a jumping off point. Not that I necessarily thought you were going super hard on like the Pixar is like cheap and like plays with you or whatever. But more so
I watch movies not to feel things. I want to be dead inside for 2 hours.
Oh man. I mean, that's all you really gotta say to illustrate sort of the silliness of like some people who were like, I never want to be manipulated by a movie ever. You're not gonna get me, Spielberg.
I won't cry. I won't be excited. Anger not on this face. I want nothing.
But that is an accusation. That like I see more seriously leveled at Pixar, especially increasingly. And it's like, while I don't think that their movies are all of them have been hits recently, I think that they generally are still pretty good at grounding their like heartstring tugging in something real.
I mean, I think the leveling at Pixar has more to do with the fact that like there's a formula behind Pixar. Funny, good opening acts giving way to an emotional, resonant third final act, which, like, I guess I can see why people are like, oh, Pixar, you're doing it again, because sometimes you want to break from that. You know, you want to see a studio try something a little bit outside of its wheelhouse, even though, I mean, that's kind of how third acts are supposed to work in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But, like, I still kind of I see the sentiment, you know, like it's not they don't end on that action high of a Marvel movie or a bizarre twist of like, you know, a Safdie or Tarantino movie, you know. They're a Pixar movie. You're gonna get a Pixar movie. Don't complain about it. You know, they're at least trying to have some emotional resonance at the end.
I mean, I guess the Marvel movie comparison is kind of interesting because I think you can level a lot of the same accusations of the Marvel movies to at least a lot of the Pixar sequels. I think why I find the Pixar sequels overall less tiresome is just like that. Like, if Pixar has a formula, their formula is good storytelling, basically. Like, their formula is like paying off their setups, whereas the Marvel formula is like big dumb space brain at the end. And I know I much prefer the one to the other.
I mean, yeah, I think Marvel isn't necessarily telling bad stories in that way. They're just telling less emotionally resonant stories. Like, they're paying off things that they've set up earlier, but like in there you're like, ooh, yeah, they're paying off this thing earlier by punching that guy in the head with the thing that they set up earlier. Whereas here, they're paying off things that they set up earlier by punching you in the heart instead, which is more, you know, more memorable when you feel emotion that isn't just, oh, hey, look, they're hitting that guy. What a twist.
While we're shitting on Marvel movies, sometimes I still think about there's videos by the skit guy, Sung-Won Cho, a voice actor, and he has two separate videos about Marvel villains, and it's like, you know, someone in a board meeting, it's like, There's the one guy's like, people keep criticizing our villains. Like, what are we going to do about it? And the one guy's like, I mean, I don't know. We could give them, like, character. He's like, ooh, you know, we're going to make a Doctor Strange. We're going to make the mean Doctor Strange. He's a bad guy. He wants to open the dark dimension. And, like, I just rewatch that sometimes because it tickles me so much.
The funniest part about that, though, is that Doctor Strange's final act is genuinely one of the best in the Marvel Universe.
It's crazy. Like, I think it lands as a bit because the dark dimension is such a silly name.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm not fucking nitpicking goddamn Pro ZT, all right?
Right. But, like, you know, I mean, you're absolutely right, because, like, the way that movie ends is, like, one of the most clever, like, final confrontations in the entire MCU. It is, like, the most memorable thing about that movie.
By a long... Well, I do have to give props to the fact that they did a CGI take of Doctor Strange pulling out of his garage as something that is incredibly memorable because I cannot explain it to this day and I hate it so much. It's like Harrison Ford as a dog in Call of the Wild.
Wait, Harrison Ford's not the dog.
He's not the dog. I know. I fucked up.
He's petting a dog man. It's an important distinction because on the one hand, you have Harrison Ford coming in to voice a dog and cut him a check, and on the other hand, you imagine Harrison Ford petting a man in full, like, you know, motion cap gear, and you can see the life drain from his eyes.
Listen, if you haven't seen it, look it up, or I will probably be posting it from our Twitter account at BADHStourcast. So... do we have anything else we want to say about this?
We have gone so far off the rails.
We have.
But that's what an adventure's supposed to do, right, bro?
Form follows function.
We just knock it out of the park every time. What could I say? We're geniuses. We're maestros of this.
We don't fall on an excuse for derailing this podcast in any way, shape, or form. There's no way in hell that's an excuse. That is absolutely the ethos of the podcast.
I just really, really wanted to talk about the dark dimension, Sean.
Oh, boy, howdy. I'm Sean McKinda.
Wait. There's one last important thing.
Okay.
That I think sums up why, despite everything, I still quite enjoyed the movie. And that I did get a genuine thrill out of when they need a raft and they enlarge a Cheeto and eat off the Cheeto raft. Like, that to me, like, that's a good bit for this kind of thing. Like, that's some, like, outside of the box, like, thinking on our hero's part, and a nice, like, image for some of the weird stuff that would happen. We did combine the fantasy bullshit and stuff, and, you know, the movie's fun. There's fun stuff like that, so I liked it.
Yeah, and honestly, if you have listened to our spoilers discussion, we really didn't talk super heavily about spoilers. Like, we didn't get into the ending at all, so, like, go watch this movie. You're not gonna have a bad time with it.
Sick.
I mean, you might get sick. There's a pandemic flying around right now, so... That's why you should stay at home and listen to more episodes of our podcast, Beating a Dead Horse. I'm Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find my letterbox, Sean McKinda. Find my writing at 25yearslatersite.com. I also do audio editing over there. Yeah, I write in a couple places now, actually. So go look me up. I don't know, man.
Well said, brother.
Listen, I'm a wordsmith, all right?
You can find me at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. You can also find me on YouTube. You might be watching it here. Probably not, because YouTube gets mad when you don't post any video, and we are indeed a podcast, which means we don't have video of our dumb faces for you to, like, jeer at. So,
what if you found a way to, like, deep fake the whole thing? Like, can you set up a thing where you just take a picture of both of our faces and our mouths move really unnaturally the entire time, and it looks like there's video behind it, even if there's not?
I think there is a program that will do that, actually.
I'm just saying that you might have that in your future. So don't look forward to that. That sounds horrible. Please don't do that.
Well, Sean, I'm gonna do my damnedest. Yeah, I mean, you can find me on YouTube. It's Jackson Keller on YouTube, just my name. But mostly you can find me on Twitch. And yeah, I like video games.
If you want to follow the podcast at BADH_cast over on Twitter. If you want to support the podcast, please, we'd really appreciate it. That's patreon.com/BADHcast. At only $1 a month, you get access to our Discord, where you can come yell at us. $5 a month gets you access to all of our backlog and bonus episodes. We've got a bunch of them out there. You should go listen to them. They're all fucking stone cold bangers. $10 a month gets you access to everything you've heard before. It also lets you request bonus episodes. If you want us to talk about something in particular, let us know. We're happy to do it. You also get a little something, something.
Thank you so much, Travis, Julia, Mom, Aunt Summer, and Pat. Y'all are great, and this isn't a real song, but I tried.
It was wonderful, and I appreciate the effort that you put into this podcast.
I get a gold star.
For today, you
Just
do.
one, though.
We'll see how you do next week, you know?
Maybe if I get enough, I'll be on the good noodle board.
I don't see that happening. I'm sorry.
I want to be a good noodle.
Also, thanks to Loads the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a great band. You should go check them out wherever you get your music, whether that's streaming, purchasing it, seeing them live, whatever you want to do. They're great. You should definitely do it. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner of their website somewhere. You can go click on that, but you should also definitely hang out, read some of the articles. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing on that site. Interviews, reviews, you fucking name it, they've got it. Movies, TV shows, wrestling, video games, sports, who the fuck, they've got everything. Fuck, man. They've got it all. You should go read their stuff, please. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Hunt, because weird horror movie month with Onward in it continues.
And also Mulan, I guess.
Oh, God, don't. Fuck.
The real horror movie.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go